Hi, everybody. Today is Monday, December 9th, and Paul Carrick Roberts is back with us. Welcome back, Paul.
Thank you, Nima.
Let's get started, Paul, with this major event in Syria. We had, it seems that Russians and Iranian are talking about that Bashar al-Assad has decided to step down because of some sort of negotiations he had with these people, these parties involved in the conflict. How do you find the conflict in Syria, the current phase of the country that we call Syria right now, and is in the hand of the descendant of ISIS?
Oh, well, Nima, until a few days ago, the correlation of forces in the Middle East was going against Washington and Israel. Things weren't looking good for Greater Israel or for Washington's ability to control oil flows and waterways because Israel was in some sorts of difficulties and its wars, both against Hamas and Hezbollah, was getting increasing criticism and bad relations. The Saudis, encouraged by the growing power of Russia and Iran, were moving in the direction of Russia and Iran. The Saudi Arabians, according to reports, were conducting military maneuvers with Iran, which is highly unusual. And everything looked like that Israel would have to eventually pull in its horns and that the Americans would eventually be departing the Middle East. It would be lost to Russia and Iran. But suddenly, we saw the United States unleash its CIA mercenaries. It was a well-planned attack that succeeded in, 2 days, 3 at the most. It may have been facilitated by American payments to the Syrian military, because we saw that the Syrian military simply did not fight. They just withdrew. They withdrew from the cities. They withdrew from Damascus. And this was the same military that had stopped and defeated, with the help of Russian air power, the same CIA mercenary army previously. The fighting had come to an end with the so-called Astana Agreement. Astana, I think it's Astana Agreement, that Putin was so keen on negotiating. Well, this agreement, where the Russians again mistakenly trusted their enemies and relied on diplomacy instead of military victory, were stupid. And what this agreement did, it left the Americans in control in a sector of Syria where the oil is. And apparently, if reports are correct, Washington used the oil, it routed it through Turkey to provide Israel with fuel to destroy Palestine and renew the fight with Hezbollah, and provided a base for Washington to organize the quick coup in Syria, which toppled the government, as I said, probably with payments to the Syrian military, so that Syria's gone. I think the country essentially will disappear. Already, Israel has claimed the Golan Heights buffer zone. They've moved in, they've taken that, they say it's essential to the protection of Israel from threats. So what threats now that Israel and the U.S. control Syria? I don't know, but I suspect Syria will be divided between Turkey and Israel, with the Americans keeping the oil part, and maybe the Kurds. I don't know how the conflict between Turkey and the Kurds will influence whether or not the Kurds end up with part of Syria as a Kurdish state. But I think it's safe that Syria is lost, it's gone as a country. So that as the year 2024 ends, we see two countries wiped off the face of the earth: Palestine and Syria. So I think the consequences are vast. Already in Russia, there are strong, loud recriminations. Putin is catching it. The Russian commanders in Syria are catching it. The general in charge of the chief of the Russian staff is catching it. The Russian military intelligence is catching it. People are saying, how could you be so stupid not to see what was happening, what was taking place? How could you have this intelligence failure? How could you have this inability to act? Why did you piss away the country we fought for 9 years? The Russians went in there to stop Obama, the American president, from invading. They've been fighting there. I mean, it's not a high level. It was mainly from the air. The Russians had some losses, but they weren't anything to be concerned about. And it was all under control until once again Putin fell for a diplomatic solution like Minsk agreement. And the result is catastrophic for Russia, for Iran. Iran is now isolated in the Middle East. There's nothing now between the Americans and Israel. Iran has no more buffers, no allies. It's cut off from the ability to supply Hezbollah. So I suspect Israel will move into Lebanon. They'll certainly be able to occupy the southern part. They've wanted the water resource there for a long time. And that's my cat. Hey, you move out of the way. And we will see from the recriminations against Putin and his government. I mean, this is an amazing blunder. A loss of confidence of Russians in their leadership. Now, what if the next thing that happens is Washington's color revolution in Georgia succeeds and another front is opened against Russia because Putin's doing nothing about it? Nothing. It's just like he did nothing about Maidan, the overthrow of the Ukrainian government. If Washington succeeds a second time in a row, you could see Putin unstable. I think that if Putin were to fall, which is the intent of the neoconservatives, all of this is their agenda to destabilize Putin. They think if they get rid of Putin, that somehow they've got Russia and they can break the Russian Federation apart like they broke apart the Soviet Union. That's probably not realistic because I think Putin's replacement would likely be a much more determined war leader. And Putin's replacement doesn't in any way diminish Russian military capabilities. It would probably result in them being used finally, which would not be good news for Israel or the West. So I see this as a disastrous outcome. The neoconservatives in Washington and Trump's appointees, which are essentially Zionists, they will be emboldened and they'll have a hard time now not going after Iran. Whether Russia stands down again. If so, in fact, I think already Russia has lost standing, and this is going to affect BRICS. You know, BRICS was on a roll, everybody wanted to join, and now Putin has blown it. And they're going to wonder. It's just like the Saudis. I suspect the Saudis now will reinstate the petrodollar in exchange for American protection. You know, the Saudis got too far out away from, and when they announced they would accept payment, all currencies made Washington carrying on military exercises with Iran was a risky thing for the Saudis to do. But of course, they didn't know that the Russians would simply default in Syria. But this change is dramatic. It restores the prospects for Greater Israel. It restores the prospects for the U.S. to continue to control oil flows and waterways. And unfortunately, it encourages more aggressive behavior toward Russia and Iran.
Paul, do you see this, what has happened in Syria, as a coordination between the United States, Israel, and Turkey? And why did Turkey decide to cooperate with them, if that's the case?
Well, the only information I have is reports that it was Israel, the U.S., and Turkey. I've not seen any challenge to that, and these reports also come from Russia. John Hilmer, for example, you know, longtime reporter from Moscow. This is his take. Why Turkey? I don't know. It could well be because Turkey, I think, had some disputes with Assad about areas in Syria where Kurds were protected or given refuge or were operating. I don't follow all of that. But it could well be that this was in the mind of the Turkish leader, a chance to resolve the problem he has had with the Kurds for all these years. I don't know what's going to happen to the Kurds, whether now, since there's, and I don't know to what extent Syria was giving them any kind of protection. But it seems now he can move against them if he wants to, and I suspect he does. So there'll be that kind of, that's a potential for more conflict, Kurds and Turkey. And I'm not able to estimate what these forces, essentially, these are groups, there are a couple of groups that, as I understand it, were created by the CIA. I think they were first used in Libya against Gaddafi. They were then sicked on Syria after the Russians blocked the American invasion that Obama had planned. We sent in these mercenaries, and ever since, the Western media has pretended that they are a Syrian opposition. They are the moderate Democrats, ISIS. And these people that are sometimes called jihadists, but they're now the Syrian opposition, the Democratic Center, or whatever. And the leader, or the purported leader, said the other day that he was a great friend of Israel and Israel had nothing to fear. So if that's the case, then clearly they're not jihadists. But I don't know what to expect from that as to whether there will now be fights for power or fights for who is the ruler, or how the various factions that comprise Syria, how this will work out. I don't know. I mean, there may be extensive internal bloodshed. I just don't know. But Turkey clearly turned against Russia by joining this alliance. So that in itself is bad news for Russia, because Turkey was moving out of the Western orbit. You know, it was talking about joining BRICS. It wasn't getting along with NATO, and well, BRICS could now be closed, or BRICS itself may close, because the leadership, which was Russian, has failed so miserably in Syria. And the other leader, China, did nothing either. And China is dependent on Iran, I think, for 25% of its energy. Well, if Iran goes, this has got to hurt China. And yet they seem to be indifferent to that situation. So I would say that the fall of Syria has renewed the power of Israel and Washington. And it's been at the expense of Iran, China, and Russia.
Do you find the situation with the Palestinians in the West Bank and Gaza being, let's put it this way, is Israel going to occupy the rest of Palestine?
I think it'll be annexed. They're not going. Palestine, I think, is no longer exists, and it'll be annexed. I mean, they're already the Israelis are already taking what little bits left of the West Bank, and it may well be they'll take all of Lebanon, and then Beirut will be where they displace the Palestinians to. As you know, the Palestinian refugee camps, you know, there've been a couple of generations born in these camps. They're in Jordan, they're in Lebanon. And so Israel may simply take Lebanon, annex the southern part, and turn the Beirut area into refugee camps and stick the remains of the Palestinians there. I mean, that could happen. I just don't know what they're going to do, you know, with the Palestinians. The world has stood aside while they've killed probably a couple 100,000. Whether they'll stand aside while they kill 2 million, I don't know. But I think Israel now has the power to annex what little bit is left of Palestine. You know, it's been disappearing year by year since 1947. And there's very little left of Palestine, and nothing was ever done about the previous annexations. So I don't see how anything can be done about the little bit that's left. It'll be annexed, and who's going to stop it? The only question is, where will they put the refugees? Maybe the Israelis will pay the Egyptians to take them, or they may simply put them into Lebanon.
Don't you think that the situation between Turkey and the United States, we know that the United States is supporting Kurds in that region, in Syria. And is there any sort of deal between the United States and Turkey? Maybe the United States stop supporting Kurds, and on the other hand, Turkey cooperating with them in Syria.
Yeah, I think, you see, the United States supports the Kurds as it's sort of a costless thing to do for human rights. We won't support the Palestinians' human rights or the human rights of a lot of other people, but the Kurds, that's safe because it doesn't really hurt Turkey, and we don't really support them with military weapons and missiles, and they're not a state, a country. So I think it's easy for Washington to support them. But it's not easy to lose Turkey to Russia or Iran. It's not easy to have Turkey desert the EU and NATO for BRICS. So yes, the United States will choose Turkey over the Kurds. There's no doubt.
How about the future of the relationship between Iran and Russia? Is what has happened in Syria is going to reinforce the relationship between Iran and Russia, or we're going to see some sort of division coming along?
Well, I can't say. It's certainly not in Russia's interest to have Iran fall too, because then it's just open walkways into Russia for the CIA's mercenaries, for the jihadists to come in and stir up the various Muslim populations that are part of the Russian Federation. So the Russians need Iran as a buffer, and Putin said, a month or so ago that he would not permit an attack on Iran. But Putin says lots of things and doesn't ever follow through. So I don't know what he would do. I also don't know whether Iran has any confidence in Russia after this debacle in Syria. It was pointless. It's due entirely to Russian inattention, Russian inaction. The Russians could easily have defeated those forces, but it would have been an easy thing for them to do. But I think that Putin and Lavrov have reached the point where the avoidance of war is the main consideration. And I think that they identify now the interest of Russia with avoiding war. So they won't be a good ally for anyone, if I'm correct. But if you look at what Putin's doing and saying, and if you watched Tucker Carlson's interview with Lavrov, it came across very strong. The overriding agenda of Russia is to avoid war. And despite Putin having said that if you send missiles into Russia, you're at war with us, Lavrov contradicted that in the interview and said that, no, we are not at war with the West. So if it's all right for the US and NATO to send missiles into Russia, but it's not, they're not at war. If they won't defend themselves, well, they're going to defend, and they wouldn't defend Syria, why are they going to defend Iran? So I think this is going through the Iranians' heads. I think Iran is isolated. The Chinese simply are determined not to be involved in anything. And so you may see the pro-Western forces in Iran put pressure on the government to change its face, change its character, and become part of the Western Israeli alliance. That's entirely possible because they may feel they're totally isolated. They can't rely on Putin. They can't rely on the Chinese. There's no buffer. I think we spoke about this before, but the Iranians and Hezbollah, they had a strategic advantage and they pissed it away. When the Israeli army went into Gaza, this was a perfect time for Hezbollah, for Iran to unleash the missiles on Israel, which would have been devastating, and have Hezbollah come across the border. And that would have been the end of Israel. It would have ended right there. They wouldn't have had time to destroy Palestine. But they couldn't have stood between that. You can't have your army committed over here and then you get attacked from the rear, particularly a strong attack. And you have to remember that twice in history, the Hezbollah militia defeated the Israeli Defense Force and drove them out. So if that militia was better armed by Iran, and if Iran joined the fight, it would have been the end of Israel. And of course, the U.S. would have had to pull out of the Middle East. No American base would be safe. But they couldn't act. Just like Putin can't act, the Iranians couldn't do it. They couldn't act. Oh, mustn't do anything. Somebody will get upset. And so they brought defeat down on their heads. And I think the consequence will be either they have a change internally in government and accommodate the West, or if the change of government is resisted or doesn't happen, there's going to be a big war because Israel and the United States, I don't think, will stop now. They're on a roll. And we see Putin still unable to use sufficient force to bring the Ukrainian conflict to an end. And so, as he always trusts his enemies in agreements, the Assad agreement, the Minsk agreement, he'll make agreement again in Ukraine. And it'll be a defeat. And so it looks to me like the American neoconservatives, you may remember that they were going to overthrow 7 countries in 5 years. Well, they've got them all now except Saudi Arabia and Iran. If I had to bet, I mean, I don't know, I have any inside information, but if I had to bet, I would say Iran will reinstate the petrodollar and look for American protection and give up any talk about joining BRICS. And this will leave Iran totally isolated. And so it's funny how the whole course of events could turn around in a few days. And it's funny, the Russians didn't have enough intelligence warning on the ground, enough awareness that these forces were being prepared. You would think they would know that the Syrian generals are paid off. There's so much you can observe, if you're paying attention. And it may well be the Russian intelligence services are not effective because of the dark days of the KGB and the NKVD. And the Russians made us feel like you can't trust intelligence services. They do bad things. They're not compatible with democracy, and they may simply not have good information. It makes you think that Russia does not have an intelligence service because why? Putin got caught off guard by Georgia's invasion of South Ossetia. He got caught off guard by the Maidan Revolution. He got caught off guard now in Syria. Well, how can you be caught off guard on such obvious things if you've got an intelligence service? I just don't think the Russians have an intelligence service. Or if they do, it's traitorous. It's hard to explain how a country as formidable as Russia would be caught off guard by the Americans training an army in Georgia and sending it in to South Ossetia. Now, Putin was at the Beijing Olympics. He was totally unaware. When we overthrew the Ukrainian government, he was at the Sochi Olympics, totally unaware. I don't know where he was while we overthrew Syria. But you see, Washington acts decisively and Putin doesn't. So he's at a great disadvantage. And who was it that said, I'm on the side of the largest battalions? Napoleon, I think. And Napoleon was always on the attack. He did not fight defensive wars. So,
Paul, it seems that Iranians, together with Russians, were informed about what's going on in Syria. At least from Iranian officials, we've learned that 2 months ago, they have informed Bashar al-Assad in Syria that they're going to attack you in the near future, but which was rejected by Assad. It seems that he had some sort of hope by those new improvement in the relationship between Syria and Arab states. He had some sort of hope that he can survive, he can improve the situation in Syria. How, if that was the case, which Russians together with Iranians are talking about this, they were not blind about what's going on in Syria. But it seems that the leadership in Syria was not prepared to get along with the plans coming from Moscow or Iran.
well, I don't know that. But what I do know is that the plan to overthrow 7 countries in 5 years is real. It was written explicitly by the Zionists in their own magazine, Commentary. The editor, Norman Podhoretz, called for that. And then we had it in the neoconservative think tank. I forget what it was called. They stated it. And then we had General Wesley Clark, the 4-star American general, the commander-in-chief of NATO, who went on television and said he was in the Pentagon, and a general, one of his former subordinates, called him in and says, we're going to attack Iraq. And he said, what for? And the general said, I don't know, but we are. And then later, he was again, and they called him in and said, General, it's worse now. We're going to attack 7 countries in 5 years. And he tells us, and then he writes about it, and he repeats it. Well, it's clearly the intention is to remove all obstacles to greater Israel and all obstacles to Washington's control of oil flows and waterways. So all these other things don't matter. That's the controlling agenda. It's that agenda. And that's what's playing out. So the question then is, if Iran and Russia knew about it, why didn't they do something? How could they possibly think they were going to benefit from this? In what ways do they benefit? They kick the can down the road. They put off what's going to happen while weakening themselves. So if it's like you report, Nima, then I would conclude that the government of Iran and the government of Russia are totally incompetent. They're a bunch of fools, idiots. There's nothing else you can say about them. If the Americans and Israelis tell them in advance what we're going to do, and they sit there and let it happen, it's to their disadvantage, then you'd have to say that they're simply not competent governments. There's really nothing else that you can say about it. What good has come of it? None. And I think it is now greatly strengthened. See, Washington's hold on the world was weakening. You had BRICS, you had the Chinese version, the Silk Road, all this, and all this move away from the dollar. And well, I think now this is all damaged. The hopes and all of that have been hurt. And Washington has recovered a tremendous amount of lost authority. And people are saying, well, Americans always win. And so how are we going to risk being on Iran's side and Russia's side? They always lose. So that's the realistic picture. It's not maybe fancy foreign affairs analysis. And this one said that, and that one said this, and so on and so on. But it doesn't really matter what any of them say. The agenda is Greater Israel. And there's nothing left but Iran and Saudi Arabia. And Saudi Arabia is really not left because they're going to save themselves by getting back under American protection. And I suspect that's what will happen in Iran. The liberal forces, the ones that Washington has cultivated and financed, will now be more influential. And the argument will be, we're alone and we can't trust the Russians, and what are we going to do? And we have to make some kind of accommodation. So I think, there won't be any revival of the Muslim world.
Paul, do you think Iran, right now, it seems that in Iran, they have some sort of dilemma in case of what would be the next step on their part? Can they go after some sort of diplomacy toward the West, or they go after improving their capabilities in terms of nuclear program and make a deterrence on their part?
I don't know how they'll make decisions. I'm not Iranian. And all I can say is what I've said, Nima. I think that the liberals, the pro-Western liberals, or the realists, will say we're isolated, and the only way we can come out of this is we make some accommodation with the West. And the opposition to that may be too strong. I mean, after all, Iranians had the revolution. They threw out the czar, and they're trying to govern in the name of an Islamist state. And that has definite characteristics, definite meaning, and they simply may not be able to do that. I think if they're exposed, and the United States and Israel are not going to let them develop nuclear weapons. In fact, whether Iran is going to develop nuclear weapons or not, the Americans and the Israelis are going to accuse them of doing so as an excuse to attack. You got to, again, understand that Trump's appointees are almost entirely Zionist. And the ones in foreign affairs and military hate Iran. They despise Iran, and they speak of it in the worst terms. But even people who aren't in that area are Zionists. Almost all of Trump's appointments are in Israel's pocket. So it'd be hard for Iran, if they decide to go that way, to make an accommodation with the United States. Now, Nima, everything I've said in terms of, the official explanations, it sounds like nonsense. Everything I've said. But the official explanations are designed to keep everybody stupid and blind so that the agenda doesn't get interfered with. And I speak outside the agenda and outside the narratives, which I suppose is why you keep coming to me for interviews. Otherwise, I don't think you'd be interested if I sound like the New York Times or CNN or the BBC. What the hell? But I do know that what I say sounds absurd, ridiculous, and all of that to people who constantly hear the official narratives. It sounds like I'm on the side of Russia and Iran. But what I'm on the side of is reality. And the reality is that we're headed, unless they surrender, which is possible, Putin may surrender rather than have a nuclear war. But unless they surrender, we are headed to a nuclear war. And that's what I'm against. And the arguments I make are to show the dangers in the aggressiveness and the provocations that the West brings to Russia, China, and Iran. Because it pushes their back to the wall, and either they have to surrender or they got to fight. And by that time, the only way to fight is with nuclear weapons. So that's my fear. That's the reason I speak out as I do. It's not that I'm on the side of Russia and Iran or China. It's that I am against nuclear war because nothing really would be left. It's devastating. And in a modern society, used to being able to go to the grocery store, to go to the pharmacy, you've got light, you've got water, you've got hospital, all that's gone. There's no supply systems. And in a modern economy, people don't have farm animals and gardens. And also, in a nuclear war, many of the experts say you get nuclear winter. The sun's blocked, and you can't grow anything, and you just have coal, and there's no way to deliver any fuel, or even to get at it. Beyond cutting down whatever trees are in the vicinity. So it's just a gruesome thought nuclear war, and so I think the best way to avoid it is that the Assad being attacked and provoked have a very strong foot they put down, and sometimes that requires them just to knock the crap out of somebody, just to show that they will strike. Well, this is what has not been shown. See, when the Iranians showed they could penetrate the Iron Dome, they were very careful not to actually hit anything. Well, why in the world would you show your enemy that you can destroy them and not do it? It would have been better not to show, because it didn't deter Israel. You just gave away your strategic advantage by showing them, but without hurting them. The same with the way Putin has fought this war in Ukraine. He's let something go on for 3 years that he could have ended in 3 weeks. He's done nothing to take the Ukrainian government out of the ability to fight a war. He's left the Ukrainian government in place unmolested so it can continue the war. Well, what sense does this make? It's let the West get more and more and more and more involved, and now they're firing missiles into Russia. Well, how long can this go on? I mean, what if the missiles hit the Kremlin? Is he still going to say, oh, nothing happened? It's a situation that is full of risk. And if the United States can continue to inflict defeats and humiliations on Putin, the effect is likely to be his replacement by a very strong, determined, even reckless leader that won't stand for any of that. And then, poof, there goes the world. So, of course, the West is also guilty of not realizing this. Why is their hegemony of the West more important than the survival of Earth? But they think it is, or they think there's no risk because, as I said, Putin never does anything. So by never doing anything, he has not minimized war, he's maximized it because he's discounted. He'll really be discounted after this disaster in Syria. So I expect the provocations to get worse and the risk to go up. And so I can't find any evidence that the Russians realize what it takes to stop this process toward nuclear war, and neither can the West. The West just gets encouraged. Oh, we got away with that provocation. Let's see if we can get away with this one. And they keep escalating. So just to repeat myself, I think the West is relying on Putin and Iran to surrender. If they don't surrender, then we're going to have a nuclear war.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Paul, for being with us today. Great pleasure as always.
Okay, Nima. Thank you for letting me express these concerns. And I hope people can get their mind straight to see that what I'm saying is just common sense. And the record so far bears me out. Everything I said would be the consequence, has been.
See you soon, Paul.
Okay, Nima.
Bye-bye. Take care. Bye-bye.
Send me the URL.
I'm going to send it to you right now.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Goodbye.
Goodbye.